Hello guys, welcome to part 2. This is yarns. In this part, we're going to cover a different variety of yarns, the yarn that you'll be using for your project, and the possible yarns that you might be using in future projects. So this is the yarn. If you purchased the supply pack, this is the yarn that came in that pack. This is a Red Heart brand yarn, and this is a very common yarn in like a Joann's, a Michael's, something that is kind of a budget craft store. Now if you go into your small business, local kind of luxury yarn shop, they're not going to typically have Red Heart because this is a cheaper synthetic fiber yarn. Now the reason that this is a great yarn for learning and practicing on our first project is so that you guys don't feel bad about messing up or experimenting or trying something that you've never tried before. When you go to a luxury yarn shop, you might be a little bit surprised by the cost of yarn if you're used to shopping at Joann's or Michael's. So with 3 of these, if we look here, with 3 of these, where does it say that? 3 of these, you can make a whole blanket, this whole beautiful blanket, and they recommend using those circular needles. So jumbo yarn, I would normally recommend, I do not advocate for synthetic yarns. Normally they're bad for the environment, and they actually get kind of crunchy and less soft over time, particularly if they're washed or exposed to heat. So this is our learner, beginner, I know you're gonna do better in the future yarn. So let's learn how to read our labels. First we have the brand. We're going to start with how much yarn is in here. Now, once you master the art of knitting and you get into patterns, you'll want to pay attention to ounces, grams, and then yards or meters, depending on if the pattern you're working with is written by someone in America or written by someone anywhere else in the world. They'll tell you how many yards or meters you need to complete the project. Now, sometimes these commercial yarns come with a pattern, and it's actually on the underside of this label here is where you'll find that blanket pattern. Now, let's say we wanted to order this yarn again. I've knit something and I've run out and I just need a little bit to finish off this project. I would look here to find the color of the yarn that I need to replenish. Sometimes, particularly with natural yarns, like there will be several gray colors and they all look very similar. It can be hard to know which one to buy. I often have like gone to the knit shop and thought like, oh, I'll be able to recognize it, and I get there and I'm like, oh, there are 4 greens in the same brand and the same yarn, and I don't know which green I was supposed to buy. So you look at this color is called buff or beige, and then you can even look at the dye lot to match those. Okay, now here we have a nice little diagram to show us how to pull the yarn out of the ball. Now, when you go to start your yarn, there will be an end that's in the middle, in here, in the middle of your ball, and there will be an end that's wrapped around the outside of the ball. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's over here. Yeah, I tucked it away. So if I were to pull from this outside yarn, my ball would kind of turn and twist and spin around as I pull that yarn out. However, if I pull from this inside yarn here, my ball doesn't move. You might get a little bit of yarn vomit that poofs out, but my ball isn't going anywhere. I can stuff that back in there for the time being. Okay. Now, information that also might be useful on your label is wash and dry instructions. So this says don't iron it, avoid heat, and they even have it kind of written out down here. The major thing with acrylic, plastic, synthetic yarns is that heat will damage it over time. Versus something that is more natural fiber typically holds up a little bit better to heat. So you want to know You also want to know, like, can I put it in the washing machine? This even gives you the temperature that you can put it on. So you can wash it in the machine, but at low heat, and you can tumble dry, no heat. And then over here we have the gauge. This is the needle size, so either 5mm or 8 US. Now we'll talk about needle size. When you're picking a project, when you're picking a yarn, you want to pay attention to this. What size needles should you be using? I've sent you guys, if you bought the pack, I've sent you the proper needle to use with this yarn, but any future projects you want to pay attention to that. Now this over here, this says this is a medium weight yarn that's 4 ply. That means that there are 4 strings, 4 threads twisted into one in order to create this yarn. You can have single ply, 2 ply, 3 ply, I don't know, infinity ply. I don't know how many you could possibly get in there, but if you think about like a rope that you would use to like tether something with, it's going to have a lot of threads. It's going to make it stronger the more threads you have in there. A single ply yarn is going to be something that's kind of fluffy and won't have a ton of structural integrity. Now that's really only important if you're making utilitarian products. Okay. Now, let's show you what some other options might look like. This is kind of a similar product. It's a little bit smaller. This is a natural fiber wool of the Andes, and I'm going to put up a chart here. This is going to be part of your packet information. Worsted weight is kind of a, usually hats, sweaters, we have lace weight, fingering weight, worsted weight. I'll send you the full scale and you can kind of look at that. It will tell you what weight to pair with what kind of projects. So let me show you a worsted weight versus a lace weight. So here's worsted. You can see here about how thick that is. Now let's take a look at, let's pull one thread out from this lace weight yarn. Okay, see how thin that is in comparison? This is going to create a really gauzy, lightweight lace garment. Now you might be looking at this and saying like, wow, that's such a strange shape. It's twisted. True. So when you buy a higher end, more luxury style yarn, typically it's going to come twisted up in a knot like this. This is when you're shopping at your local boutique, your knitting yarn shop, and I'm going to show you how to untwist this. Now typically when you go into those stores and you buy a yarn like that, they'll ask you, do you want us to wind it into a ball for you? So you're going to pull that twisted, so this one was twisted up, you're just going to pull it apart. You saw this one end was tucked inside there. Pull it apart, untwist it. There we are. Okay, now we've got one big loop. Let me try and get that all on the camera for you. Got one big loop, and we've got like an organizer thread here. Now, you probably don't have to worry about this for a little bit, but when you go into that yarn shop, make sure that you ask them to wind it into a ball for you so you don't get home and have to worry about rolling it into a ball yourself. Now, if you do get in that situation, let's say you order this online, you get home and you don't know how to twist this into a ball, this is where a traditional yarn ball, classic yarn ball that's hand wound comes into play. I will link a YouTube video down below where I show you guys how to actually make one of these. I have a full video on this specifically if you run into that situation. And if you guys follow me on YouTube, I have quite a few tips and tricks videos for knitting. So let's get into some of these stranger looking novelty yarns. Let's talk about these. I want to start by saying that these should not be your beginner yarns. And I'll tell you why. When we get into, I'm going to show you this fluffy yarn. When we get into knitting with these, it can be really hard to see your stitches. particularly with anything that's fluffy. See how fluffy this is? This is a mohair. This is a very fluffy yarn. This one is multicolored, and this is actually a hand spun yarn that I spun myself. This is multi-variant colored, and it's different weights throughout the yarn. Now these are really fun to knit with. However, when we're first starting out and we're first knitting, we want to be able to very clearly see the yarn and see each stitch. So I encourage you to eventually experiment with all of these different types of yarn. But for today, for the very beginning, I want you to start out with something that is one color, just like what I sent with the pack, something that is monochromatic, one color, and is a medium weight yarn that's consistent all the way through and is easy to see our stitches. That's just going to help us out. So if you have some of those funky fun yarns sitting to the side and you just can't wait to play with them, wait until you've made it through one project. That's all I ask. Get through one project first, and then we'll move on to these. Okay, I'm going to tag on to the end of this yarn video just kind of the rest of our accessories. So let's talk about scissors. I prefer to keep something like this, a plastic handled, cheaper scissor in my knitting kit, like a little knitting bag where I keep everything together. That way I know that I always have a pair on the side. If I'm doing some serious cutting, these are fabric shears, but see how bulky and heavy they are? They're a really nice pair of scissors, but I don't want to carry this around with me in my knitting bag. These scissors, these are little thread snips. This is a good quality pair of scissors that are great for working with. If I bring back like our lace weight yarn, really nice for snipping those and getting really close to the work. But with something that's a little bit thicker, like this worsted weight yarn, it can be hard on the scissors. It can damage your scissors over time to use these little embroidery scissors. So I recommend these. These are kind of good travel on the go. You can even get a little sleeve to cover, and see how these are rounded at the end. You're not going to worry about those like puncturing through a bag or accidentally puncturing a hole in your project, something like that. Our next item, next knitting accessory on our list here are these tapestry needles. Let me clear the scissors out of the way so we can focus. So tapestry needles are typically used for weaving the ends of our yarn. When we finished a project and we've got a little tail, or at the beginning of our project we've got a little tail, we use these blunt-ended tapestry needles to weave that end back in and make it disappear. You'll notice that these come in different lengths. We've got like a nice thick long one, and that can be used for a thicker yarn. I like to keep a bunch of these on hand just in case one goes missing. All right, well, that's gonna finish up part 2. I did say in part 1 when we covered needles that you guys could skip ahead to the knitting part. I do recommend that you listen to each of these videos. I also want to recommend that I timestamp them and that you can go back and review something at a later date. So that's one of the great parts of having these pre-recorded videos, is that we can move forward and go back as needed. Replay something if you need to. All right, so part 3, we're gonna jump into actually knitting. Let's do it.